Hello everyone, it's Charles2 here. Good to be back in action after my power supply died about a month ago, I think. I just got the replacement and installed it yesterday, and my PC seems to be doing just fine. So it feels good to be back doing videos. I love doing this, and I'm going to start off with the kind of video that is requested of me often, and that is the kind of video in which I criticize libertarians or debunk their criticisms of Ayn Rand. I respond to criticisms of Ayn Rand, usually from libertarians. I haven't actually done any of those, I don't think, but I get requests for that all the time, along with material sent to me. Hey, do this, do this, do this. Somebody sent me a page of criticisms by David Friedman, the anarchist son of Milton Friedman, of whom Ayn Rand did not approve, and I'm sure she would approve even less of his son. Anyway, that was just text, though, and as I was reading it, I thought, these are just too stupid in that characteristically libertarian, concrete-bound way for me to respond to. Anybody who falls for these deserves to be confused. So, for that reason, and because video is just more interesting, I decided to take on Sorry, I heard something. That's why I paused for a second. I decided to take on Stefan Molyneux instead. So, I'm going to watch this video here. It's part 2 of his criticisms of objectivism. You can see this one's about ethics. He did part 1, which is apparently only available to people who support him, which I don't and never will. So, I haven't watched this before. I think you'll get the best commentary from me if I just go into this blind. I mean, I am aware of Stefan Molyneux and the kind of mistakes he makes. So, in any case, here we go.
Hi everybody, it's Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain Radio. I hope that you're doing well. This is Objectivism and Analysis, Part 2. And Part 1 is available for premium subscribers.
Did he say Stefan? I thought it was Stefan, or I guess I always say Stefan. Stefan? I don't like that. But I guess that's the Canadian way of saying it, right? They say like Islam. You know, Canadians can't hear the difference between ah and aw, like AH and AW. They can't hear the difference. Now, if you're some Canadian who can, don't message me telling me, yes, we can. This is a documented difference in general between Canadians and Americans. And I guess that has to do with why they pronounce things like Stefan, Islam. Anyway.
To Free Domain Radio at www.freedomainradio.com, wherein I talk about an introduction to objectivism, a brief history of objectivism, my respect for objectivism and Ayn Rand, and other thoughts and so on about the introduction, so you can get it. It's available there. For subscribers, if you have subscribed or you've given me a donation of $50 or more, I think it is, then just send me an email and I'll give you access to it. So, the primary issue with objectivism is not in terms of metaphysics, not in terms of epistemology. So, nature of reality, the axiom that existence exists, all seems perfectly sensible to me, and forms the basis of my own particular take on the problems of ethics and politics. But I do believe that Ayn Rand did not solve the problem of ethics, did not figure out how to get the ought from the is, right? So the central problem as identified by David Hume in the 18th century. He was a Scottish...
Yeah, this is actually what David Friedman's whole article, piece of text, was about. It was about Ayn Rand and ought from is. People really seem to have trouble with this.
Enlightenment philosopher and a chunky fellow. A central problem from that was identified by David Hume was that you cannot get a should from an is. You can't get an ought from an is, right? So if you're watching a rock bouncing down a hill, You can't say, you ought to land here or you ought to land there. It just lands where it lands. This is not to make an argument for determinism. I'm no determinist about
Wait.
the problem is...
That's a bizarre way of phrasing it. No, the rock... No, the problem would be you see that a rock is bouncing. What does that imply for how I should act? This is a bizarre way of even framing it at the outset.
Is that you can't get shoulds from existence, right? Their ethics does not exist in the real world, right? Ethics doesn't exist like a tree or a cloud or anything like that. Ethics, in my view, as you may know...
No, this isn't a metaphysical argument. It's not, look, the way he's framing it is that it's deterministic. Look, a rock just bounces. You can't say what it should do because it's determined. That's not the idea here. The idea isn't, you don't have free will, so there's no such thing as what you ought to do. The idea is, how can you get what you should do from the fact that something is? How can the fact that anything is what it is tell you what you should do? So this is not a good way to start this out.
If you've watched some of these videos, is akin to the scientific method. It does not exist within reality, but there's no way to determine truth or falsehood without applying rigorous logic and empiricism. So I have a particular approach to ethics, which I've talked about before. So as far as metaphysics go, the nature of reality, epistemology, the nature of knowledge, the methodology for determining truth and falsehood, I'm a complete slave to the Rand, and happily so. She did a magnificent job of dealing with these issues. I'm going to use Galt's speech.
I would love to hear Stefan Molyneux give a discussion of Ayn Rand's epistemology, especially in light of his recent turn toward religion. You know, when I said in a past video that given enough time he will become religious, well, if you've been watching him, you will observe that he is even closer to religion than he ever has been. You know, when he was on Dave Rubin, he's like, yeah, you rationally can't believe it, but maybe some people need to believe it for ethical reasons. Maybe it's just practical for the dummies. But then in a later video, some, I can't remember, some movie about or some video about a documentary or something. He's talking about how, hey, if there's no God, that's just then Nietzschean power lust reigns supreme. He says, not as this is how other people will think, but how he thinks. If there's no God, then why shouldn't you just be Thrasimiacian, Nietzschean, power luster, lie, cheat, and steal? So, clearly he doesn't understand objectivism. I mean, that's obvious if you watch anything he does, but I think it would be a hoot to hear him try to explain objectivist epistemology.
Speech from Atlas Shrugged. If you haven't read the book, I don't think this will be too much of a spoiler, but you may want to wait. No particular issue with, again, metaphysics and epistemology. When Ayn Rand starts to write this, though, she and I at least part ways. It doesn't mean anything other than that I disagree. She writes, a being of volitional consciousness has no automatic course of behavior. He needs a code of values to guide his actions. Value is that which one acts to gain and keep. Virtue is the action by which one gains and keeps it. No particular problem with that. Value presupposes an answer to the question of value to whom and for what. Again, absolutely essential when it comes to ethics. Value presupposes a standard, a purpose, and the necessity of action in the face of an alternative. Where there are no alternatives, no values are possible. Absolutely, if you're forced to do something, there's no ethical content. There is only one fundamental alternative in the universe, existence or non-existence, and it pertains to a single class of entities, to living organisms. Fabulous. The existence of inanimate matter is unconditional, the existence of life is not. It depends on a specific course of action. Matter is indestructible, it changes its forms, but cannot cease to exist. It is only a living organism that faces a constant alternative, the issue of life or death. Life is a process of self-sustaining and self-generated action. If an organism fails in that action, it dies. Its chemical elements remain, but its life goes out of existence. It is only the concept of life that makes the concept of value possible. It is only to a living entity that things can be good or evil. I think that's a leap.
Before he goes off and ruins that all those brilliant words he just read. Wow, wasn't that beautiful? Every time I hear Ayn Rand, I'm just more impressed. That was just lovely, precise, poetic. That was just great. And now we have to listen to Stefan Molyneux, unfortunately.
And I'll go into more in a few minutes. But life and death, good and evil, to me that's a leap, right? To go from a biological reality of the success or failure of a particular cell or organism to a moral equivalent of good and evil seems a leap to me, but I'll go into more detail as to why I think that. A plant must feed itself in order to live. The sunlight, the water, the chemicals it needs are values its nature has set it to pursue. Its life is the standard of value directing its actions. But a plant has no choice of action. There are alternatives in the conditions it encounters, but there is no alternative in its function. It acts automatically to further its life and cannot act for its own destruction. So that's fine. And here we get into an animal is equipped for sustaining its life. Its senses provided with an automatic code of action, an automatic knowledge of what is good for it or evil. And again, see, there's an equation or an equivalence between life and death and good and evil. It has no power to extend its knowledge, the animal, or to evade it. That's not quite true. In conditions where its knowledge proves inadequate, it dies. But so long as it lives, it acts on its knowledge with automatic safety and no power of choice. It is unable to ignore its own good, unable to decide to choose the evil, and act as its own destroyer. Man, she says, has no automatic code of survival. His particular distinction from all other living species is the necessity to act in the face of alternatives by means of volitional choice. He has no automatic knowledge of what is good for him or evil, what values his life depends on, what course of action it requires. Are you prattling about an instinct of self-preservation? An instinct of self-preservation is precisely what man does not possess. An instinct is an unerring and automatic form of knowledge. A desire is not an instinct. A desire to live does not give you the knowledge required for living, and even man's desire to live is not automatic. Your secret evil today, in the novel, is that is the desire you do not hold. Your fear of death is not a love of life and will not give you the knowledge needed to keep it. Man must obtain his knowledge and choose his actions by a process of thinking, which nature will not force him to perform. Man has the power to act as his own destroyer, and that is the way he has acted through most of his history. And then she talks about how human beings have, most of the philosophy and religion that human beings have subscribed to have been anti-rationality, anti-empiricism. Again, I would completely agree with that. I'll read a little bit more and then I'll dig into what I think of this.
Yay.
Man's life, she says, is the standard of morality. This is the fundamental ethical core of objectivism. All that which is proper to the life of a rational being is the good. All that which destroys it is the evil. Man's life, as required by his nature, is not the life of a mindless brute or of a looting thug or a mooching mystic, but the life of a thinking being. Not life by means of force or fraud, but life by means of achievement. Not survival at any price, since there's only one price that pays for man's survival. Reason. And again, I think this is a far too far of a leap, and I don't think it's proven. It's annoying because I agree with it, but I don't agree with the...
I nodded in agreement, thinking he was going to say, that is just so brilliant, so... what a great writer. But no, he said, no, it's too far of a leap, so I should have known. Oops.
The reason. Man's life is the standard of morality, but your own life is its purpose. If existence on earth is your goal, you must choose your actions and values by the standard of that which is proper to man, for the purpose of preserving, fulfilling, and enjoying the irreplaceable value which is your life. Since life requires a specific course of action, says Rand, any other course will destroy it. A being who does not hold his own life as the motive and goal of his actions is acting on the motive and standard of death. Since such a being is a metaphysical monstrosity struggling to oppose, negate, and contradict the fact of his own existence, running blindly amok on a trail of destruction, capable of nothing but pain. So, the contradiction that I see, and this is a contradiction that is common to many philosophers, is that there is a very strong desire to prove ethics in the absence of God. An absolutely laudable desire, one which I beat my brains out for a quarter century before making some small progress, I do believe, on the problem. So, Ayn Rand is trying to say that the rational is the moral, that which is allows human life to flourish is the moral, is the good, right? So, good for me is moral, and moral is not just hedonistic, right? So good for me is not just I want to go and steal and rape and pillage. She's going to say that that is immoral, even if I like it, right? And this is the huge problem that philosophers face. Hedonism versus objective ethics. So when you have objective ethics, you have a huge problem in that you have to prove, you have to get the ought from the is. You have to get the should from man's nature. But of course, many people believe that the should, or the ought, is something which a philosopher would disagree with. A rapist thinks he ought to rape, he prefers to rape, he should rape. That's why he does it, right? So a philosopher has a very, very large problem on his hands, which is that if everybody wanted to do the right thing to begin with, you wouldn't need philosophy.
Okay, I can't let this go on any further. This is always a struggle when you're watching somebody, because you think, okay, he's saying a lot of dumb things here, but does he realize how dumb they are, and he's going to come in with a counter-argument, but then explain why that doesn't work? In this case, I do not have faith that Stefan Molyneux understands why what he's saying is retarded. So, there's already a false dichotomy here. Oh, we have hedonism versus objective morality, which is... God, everything he said so far is so dumb. Alright. No, objectivism is not saying there are things you should just do because. It's not intrinsic. It actually is, quote, hedonistic in the sense that, as Ayn Rand says, happiness is the purpose. You're doing everything for the sake of positive states of consciousness. But there are definite ways to achieve those. That is not subjective. So when he says, well, what if a hedonist says, I like doing this? It's not true. Feelings are part of reality. They're not exempt from cause and effect. To achieve happiness, you have to take certain kinds of actions. But Stefan Molyneux's premise here is, well, how can you argue with how somebody tells you he feels? Very easily. I'm a human being and I can establish cause and effect relationships. I know what causes happiness. And I know that lying, cheating, and stealing, raping, and pillaging doesn't cause it. So if you say, well, that's what makes me happy. No, it isn't. You see, this is a funny thing people do. They use feelings as the ultimate standard. If I feel a certain way about something, how can you say it's wrong? I'm watching this movie, and you don't like it, but I do like it. So how can you say that's wrong? Because there's nothing beneath liking, right? Okay, well that's one level. But then what they try to do is take feelings themselves and make those subjective. You can't do that. You can't say, I feel like I feel this way. No, feeling is the bottom. When you're talking about a movie or something, okay, I mean, it doesn't actually make sense because you can like a movie, you can really like a movie that's objectively bad in a way that is bad for you and in a way that you should strive to overcome. You know, when I say that's not funny, that's not objectively funny. I don't mean that you don't find it funny. I mean you should strive to become the kind of person who doesn't find it funny, because finding it funny is bad for your life, bad for your happiness. But they go even beneath that and try to make it so that your feelings can determine your feelings. No, but feelings are the bottom. You can't say, I like feeling bad. No, feelings are the bottom. There is no liking feeling bad. It's just feeling bad. Pain is just pain, pleasure is just pleasure, happiness is just happiness, misery is just misery. There is evaluative content built in. There's good and bad built in. So this whole idea of setting up ethics as if it's trying to figure out what we need to do intrinsically that can overcome what we feel like versus just doing what we feel like, which is subjective. No, it's not feeling, which is subjective, versus objectivity, which is against feeling. No, you do what makes you feel good. Feel good. I mean, you have to be careful when you use terms like that because people can take that to mean, short-term pleasure, break your diet, eat a piece of cake. But I just mean positive states of consciousness. And there are differences in degrees. There's happiness, there's joy. There are objective differences in different states of consciousness. But no, what you do is, for the sake of those best conscious experiences, you act objectively, because there are objective ways to achieve them. So there's no dichotomy here. It's not objectivity versus feeling. You act objectively. You take these specific actions because they objectively, provably lead to happiness. Simple as that. Now, the other thing he's going to go into, he's already mentioned it a little bit, but I don't want to let this go without talking about it, is how he talks about she's bringing in good and evil, like she's smuggling this in. No, this is just his rationalism. He's conceiving of good and evil as this thing up here. And Ayn Rand's talking about facts, and here are ideas. But now she's bringing in the ideas and trying to merge them with these facts. No, what she is saying is not that good and evil are these other things, and she's trying to bring them in to match empirical reality. She's saying good as a concept refers to this. It's not some mystical thing she's trying to make match the real world. She's saying this is what we mean when we say good. This is the reality orientation. This is why Aristotle was such a genius. Because he just had this different method. He understood exactly what I'm saying right now. He didn't start with ideas up here. He said, no, I'm going to start with the world. So with metaphysics, that would be entities versus space. He doesn't think, oh, there's space and entities move around in it. He says, no, they're just things. And then we will figure out how else we can talk about things. Space is just a measurement of length and locations, whatever, relative to things. But you start with things. There are only things. You see, if you start with reality, with existence, you never have to, and then you get your ideas from existence, you never have to worry about having your ideas have to match existence. These preconceived ideas, we have good and evil up here, and how do we match them onto reality? No, there's only reality. There's only existence. So coming up with the concept of good and evil just means identifying aspects of reality, or deriving these concepts from existence. But that is clearly not how Stefan is thinking about it. All right.
But because people want to do things that most people would consider wrong, philosophers have the problem of convincing people that that is objectively wrong without ethics existing within reality. It's a really, really tricky problem. And of course, people know my solution to it, so I'm not going to focus on that. But here's the challenge, I think, that's in Ayn Rand. So she basically says there's no such thing as automatic knowledge. There's no such thing as automatic knowledge.
I couldn't tell if that plane was me or his video, but I guess it's his video.
Contradicts herself not a couple of paragraphs later when she says, since life requires a specific course of action, any other course my ethics existing within reality. It's a really, really tricky problem. And of course, people know my solution to it, so I'm not going to focus on that. But here's the challenge, I think, that's in Ayn Rand. So she basically says there's no such thing as automatic knowledge. There's no such thing as automatic knowledge. And then she contradicts herself not a couple of paragraphs later when she says, since life requires a specific course of action, any other course will destroy it. A being who does not hold his own life as the motive and goal of his actions is acting on the motive and standard of death. Such a being is a metaphysical monstrosity, struggling to oppose, negate, and contradict the fact of his own existence, running blindly amok in a trail of destruction, capable of nothing but pain. Capable of nothing but pain. But if human beings don't have any instincts which tell them right from wrong, why would somebody doing wrong be capable of nothing but pain? I know this sounds nitpicking, but it's really, really quite essential.
Wait.
When
what? Wait. Because she is this is exactly what I was just talking about. Because she is defining wrong, she is conceptualizing wrong on the basis of the fact of experiences like pain. It's not just pain, of course. There are higher emotions. This isn't just physical pain, but physical pain is a nice, dramatic, concrete for purposes of explaining this. But that's where she's getting this idea from. So he's saying, oh, well, why would we know that's wrong? I guess he's saying, why would we know that's... How could we know that's wrong if we don't have automatic knowledge? Because it's self-evident. She's looking at reality and then saying what's right and wrong based on observation. Now, pain is self-evident, but that's not a priori. That's not, quote, automatic knowledge any more than perception is automatic knowledge, but that's not what she means. You're not born knowing what's right and wrong. You're born capable of feeling pain and pleasure, and then you know pain feels bad and pleasure feels good. And then you say, oh, okay, I'm going to conceptualize right and wrong, what I should do, what I shouldn't do, at first on the basis of pleasure and pain, and then as I get older and more sophisticated and more conceptual, things will go from there.
Philosopher, you have to say to people, why should you be good? Why should you be good? It's a fundamental problem, right? And you can either go the sky pixie route and say thunderbolts will come from the invisible pixie, leprechaun, elf, Santa Claus clusters in the sky, and that's why you should be good. Or you should say, you should be good for the sake of hedonism. You should be good because it's going to make you happy, but then you get into subjectivity because what makes people happy is subjective, right? And this is the challenge.
This is what... I've become very skeptical of people who say, oh, I've read everything by Ayn Rand. Well, clearly, as Stefan Molyneux claims to have, clearly it's possible to read something without getting anything from it. You know, I was listening to Sargon talk to, I don't know, one of those idiots he talks to. And Sargon was just going on about how, what the real problem is that people don't read enough. They don't know enough of history about the Soviet Union. What? No! That's not the problem. The problem is that people don't know how to think. You know, this is actually true in Ayn Rand's case. Mine too, actually. You know, Ayn Rand... Peikoff said Ayn Rand would read one book on a subject for every 10 somebody else read. But because of her method, she knew it 100 times better. I found myself the same way. I haven't read an extraordinary amount compared to most people. But I have the right method, the right epistemological method. So, anyway, that's all to say that you could read all of Ayn Rand and still turn out like Stefan Molyneux. But happiness is not subjective. And hedonism, he's missing the whole point. Ayn Rand's view is that life is the standard, happiness is the purpose. And the whole point there is to differentiate between hedonism. Hedonism not only says that good feelings, positive states of consciousness, are not only the goal, not only the end, but also the means. They're not only what you're aiming for, they're also the things that guide you to getting there. If you feel like you want a piece of cake, that says you should eat that piece of cake. Now, what Ayn Rand is saying is no. Yes, happiness, the highest form of positive feeling, that's the purpose. That's what we should be aiming for. But in order to get there, you can't just say, what makes me feel good? What makes me feel good? That's what you're aiming for. That's not the guide for how to get there. And she identified that life is the standard and pursuing your survival is actually what makes you happy. And so life is the standard, happiness is the purpose. Stefan understands none of this, apparently. I cannot believe he is so audacious as to claim, as to be charging for a video series criticizing objectivism when he is this ignorant of the basics. All right.
More or less effaced, and effaced for thousands of years.
Oh my
Why
God.
should people...
We're only 10 minutes through. I can only say the same thing so many times. So I hope he doesn't keep making the same mistake over and over.
people be good? Why should people be good? Because they're frightened into being good by the threat of supernatural punishment or bribed with reward? Well, that's not satisfying. Right? As Sky Pixies did it, it's not an answer to anything, the origin of the universe, why be good, or anything like that. But then if you say you should be good because it'll make you happy, then you're espousing, in a way, the principle of hedonism, right? Which is, if it makes you happy, it can't be that bad. And I'm not going to break into song, but I think you know the basic problem, right? So you have either supernatural threats or an appeal to hedonism, both of which are subjective, right? So, I mean, that's the challenge. And then you can't say that ethics exists in the real world, because they don't. Right? Good people get away with, good people die of cancer and feel guilty for minor transgressions. Evil people stride the world pouring buckets of blood from every orifice and die seemingly content in their beds, right? So the hedonism principle is not enough. I mean, and of course the hedonism principle is pointless. Right? The question is, how do you deal with people who have no conscience, right? I mean, if you're going to frighten people with a sky god or something like that, then...
So, again, I mean, if you think that somebody who rapes and pillages, to use his preferred way of putting that, instead of lying, cheating, and stealing, if you think that that person is capable of getting away with it, even if he doesn't get caught by people, I mean, you don't understand the first thing about objectivism. You are a concrete-bound libertarian. You don't understand the epistemology. You don't understand how that relates to the metaphysics and the ethics and the politics and the art. You just don't... Man, I don't know how many more of these libertarian things I can do.
You will, or you may, restrain the behavior of certain people who have already a fear of doing wrong, of being punished, and some people who already have a conscience and already have the ability to process the consequences of their actions. You may control some of those people's behavior, but those people will respond to far less pressure because they already have a conscience, right? And if you appeal to hedonism, if you don't use the religious argument and you appeal to hedonism, then you run into the problem of subjectivism, and also those people whose happiness, whose pleasure principle runs counter to generally accepted ethics, like don't steal, don't kill, don't rape, don't assault, and so on. How are you going to make the case for them, right? Well, then you have to say that there's a secret kind of Freudian-style happiness that they're not going to achieve unless they follow your particular moral prescription.
Well, what this does reveal is that Stefan Molyneux is not and has never been happy. Because you see, he's equating it with pleasure, and if you use, I mean, he's clearly referring to ideas like Ayn Rand holds, that there's a higher form of experience, a conditioning background emotion that you can feel, which is what she calls happiness, a state of non-contradictory joy that comes from being in harmony with reality and the requirements of your survival, not pursuing anything that contradicts your survival. So that's the only way you can be coherent, non-contradictory. That results, only that, results in a certain kind of emotion she identifies as happiness. Now he calls this secret happiness, this thing that, oh yeah, it's this happiness that he's clearly framing it as just this thing that doesn't really exist. We just claim there's a higher form of experience. So his way of saying that, I mean, saying that it's secret as if it doesn't really exist, it's just something that you try to use to con people into being moral. I mean, that's an admission right there. Stefan Molyneux is not happy and doesn't know what it feels like, which is not a surprise.
Which, again, not really going to help. If you're going to be able to tell people you should be nice because it'll make you happy, and they say, well, that's great, then I'll be nice, then those are people who already are pretty nice to begin with, right? The real challenge is dealing with the sociopaths, right? Dealing with the sociopaths. And that's, of course, my sticking point in the way that I've tried to solve issues in terms of ethics. So, let me just check my time here. I don't want to go too long. So, man has no automatic code of survival, says Ayn Rand, which raises the need to think and to reason, which is great. But then she says that the immoral or irrational people are only capable of pain, which means that human beings do have an inbuilt knowledge of what to do, right? If she says you have no inbuilt knowledge of what to do, fantastic, then she can make the case for reason. But then if she says that if you act irrationally, you're unhappy, then she's saying you have an inbuilt code of knowledge, right? You have an inbuilt...
No, she's saying that certain things feel good and certain things feel bad, and being rational is how you feel good. That's not automatic. I mean, in a certain sense, it's self-evident on a very basic level, but I mean, that's the same mistake as saying mathematics is innate. No, it's just very obvious. I mean, not to diminish, I mean, not all of the derivative aspects of math, but just quantity and so on. Which is why people always think it's a priori. That is one thing. People are so committed to math as being disconnected from reality. People are just dogmatic about that. You should look at the comments on my on my video where I criticized Sam Harris's detached conception of probability. People just go crazy. They really have an investment in math being this otherworldly phenomenon. But no, saying that, I don't even know what he's saying, so let's just go on.
Build guidance mechanism, which is if you're irrational, you end up unhappy, right? And she says happiness is the successful state of life. Pain is an agent of death. Right? So again, she says we have no inbuilt or instinctual ways to figure out how to act, but if we act right, we're happy, and if we act wrong, we end up in pain. But again, that's a total contradiction. And
no, it's not, because you can't trust that feeling bad or that pain is guiding you where to go. I mean, maybe you need to cut off your arm in order to survive. Pain isn't a good indicator then. Pain is not an automatic form of knowledge. It is a motivator. Naturally selected into you for survival in a certain environment, in a certain context. It is not knowledge in the same way that emotions are not knowledge, any more than it's knowledge that this feels good or this feels bad. That's not what he means. What he means is, pain is, there's an implicit evaluation with pain that this thing is bad and I should avoid it. Now that's been naturally selected into us, but that is not knowledge. And Ayn Rand is not saying that's knowledge. She's saying if you look at reality, you will notice a causal connection between pain and things that are bad for you. I mean, on a certain level, you can get up to a point where pain no longer functions appropriately, but clearly on a certain level, we developed pain in order to prolong our lives. So,
and it's pretty core contradiction. So she writes, happiness is that state of consciousness which proceeds from the achievement of one's values. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true at all. I think happiness is a state of consciousness which proceeds with integrity to rationality and reality for reasons that I talked about elsewhere. But I don't think that we can really say that happiness results from the achievement of one's values, because if my value is, say, to be a published author, and I don't achieve that because society is corrupt or I just never find the right agent, then should I be unhappy? Well, whether I get published or not is outside of my control.
So, okay. He's... should it? He's trying to rewrite reality. Well, I don't like that injustice is possible, that I can be deprived of happiness. Well, you can be. It's not a matter of should. This is a factual question. Ayn Rand is interested in factual causal relationships. She's saying this state of consciousness does, in fact, result from achieving your values. Now, she means rational values. There are two senses of value. She means the fuller sense, values that correspond to reality. If you hold the right kinds of values and you achieve them, you will be happy. But if you hold the right kinds of values and other people stop you, it's not a matter of should. It's just a factual issue. You won't be happy. So, this is some of Stefan's mysticism. Supernaturalism, even.
Right, whether I have integrity and virtue in my own personal relationships, in my own life, my relationship with myself, and reality, that I have control over. So I would say that happiness proceeds from the achievement of one's values. given that she's saying that values are external, right? Success or failure within life, flourishment or non-flourishment within the realm of reality, I don't think she's just talking about eating grapes. So, a morality that dares tell you to find happiness in the renunciation of happiness is an insolent negation of morality. Again, see, morality then becomes that which gives you happiness. It is around automatic knowledge of right and wrong. Now she says, but neither life nor happiness can be achieved by the pursuit of irrational whims. Just as man is free to attempt to survive in any random manner, but will perish unless he lives as his nature requires, so he is free to seek his happiness in any mindless fraud, but the torture of frustration is all he will find unless he seeks the happiness proper to man. The purpose of morality is to teach you not to suffer and die, but to enjoy yourself and live. And again, this is the challenge that philosophers face, that evil people do very well. Genghis Khan, Saddam Hussein, I mean, yeah, okay, he died, he was hung and Hitler killed himself,
people.
but they obviously preferred the life that they had, right? As Saddam Hussein lived in palaces.
And how do we know that? How do we know they preferred the life they had compared to what they could have had? Well, because they acted that way. Okay, well, this is just psychological egoism, which is, I assume everybody watching this knows why that's wrong.
He had free run of the entire country. He got to do whatever he wanted. So evil sociopaths...
This is really psychologically revealing of Stefan here. Like that would make him happy. I mean, to him, he seems to be saying that it's obvious being a dictator would make you happy. Well, wouldn't make me happy. I mean, it wouldn't make him happy either, but isn't it funny how he's so concerned about, but I don't want to have to accept the fact that I should have to actually achieve things in reality, which is not guaranteed. He wants it, if you just have integrity, you should be happy. Well, this is a factual question. Happiness is a factual question. You get it or you don't. There's certain cause and effect relationships. And if you live in a totalitarian society, you can't be happy no matter how good you are. But he's all upset about this, and so he wants to rewrite reality and say, well, I want it to be that it's guaranteed if I act the right way. And notice he's saying this while also dismissing this secret Randian happiness. He didn't say Randian, but that's how some people would put it. He's dismissing this, but now he's all concerned about it. He is just all kinds of mixed up.
Do a lot better. Just in terms of, you can talk about internal states of unhappiness, but that's all theoretical, right? That's speculative. And also then you're saying that there's an inbuilt conscience which leads one to happiness or to unhappiness, depending on whether you live rightly or wrongly, and that's outside of your control, right? So Ayn Rand is basically arguing and saying you can't choose to be immoral and be happy, but then she can't say there's no inbuilt guide within human consciousness to guide you towards right or wrong. And the challenge is, of course, that sociopaths don't really experience.
She didn't say there's no guidance. She said there's no knowledge. What you have is, you have perception. You have means. There is a means of figuring out what you should do. But you have to use it. You have to operate it. God, this equivocation is getting tiresome.
Pain. That's why they don't change. Right? I go to a dentist because my tooth is hurting, right? Sociopaths don't change their behavior because they don't experience pain. They experience a flush of power and of dominance at a purely base biological level. What is it? Guess that 1 out of 20 people in Asia is a descendant in one form or another of Genghis Khan because he dominated and killed and raped and so on, right? And clearly he didn't find that to be too unpleasant because he kept doing it, right? I mean, George Bush obviously enjoys the exercise of power, ran for re-election, is not giving it up. So he's not experiencing pain. In fact, he's experiencing pleasure through the exercise of power, and he is flourishing, right? I mean, his daughters are not going to want for education.
Yes, I'm sure George Bush is very happy. I'm sure all of these people are very happy. No. Why? The reason they do this is as a means of getting temporary relief from their constant pain. And that's the best they can ever do. And they do this because ultimately they hate reality and the fact that they have to conform to it. So, what?
These two
Get out
skills
of
might
here.
be able to help with that. Which one would you?
Cat facts, huh? I guess I said, well, whatever it is you say when you bring that up. I don't want to say it again. Anyway, no, God, this is... Honestly, I expected better from Stefan.
They're not going to want for opportunities. And again, you can then say, well, but deep down they're unhappy. But that's not the same as ethics, right? Because the challenge is how do you deal with the fact that you can say to people, well, deep down you're unhappy, but if they don't experience that unhappiness, you have no purchase with them. Right? So again, this is the challenge, I think, in the Randian ethics at its sort of particular base. The fact is that sociopaths do enjoy hurting others. They do enjoy dominating others. They do enjoy political power. They do enjoy controlling people. Parents who abuse their children clearly do enjoy or prefer to abuse their children rather than to face the unpleasantness that an ethical reevaluation of their life will cause, right? I mean, when you go to a doctor because you have a sore throat and it turns out you have throat cancer, you're going to feel a whole lot worse before you feel better, right? So just as a doctor can provoke a great deal of pain in order to end up with you being cured with any luck, a philosopher or an ethicist or even a psychologist, if you're in counseling, will lead you through a series of steps that will result in a great deal of pain. And this, of course, is the fundamental avoidance mechanism that's in place with people. I mean, as like all organisms, we pursue pleasure and we avoid pain. I mean, that's sort of natural. And so the ethicist has the great challenge, right, of saying, well, philosophy is supposed to, if you say philosophy is supposed to make you happy, well, it's going to make you very unhappy to begin with, because you're going to have to reevaluate your relationships, you're going to have to live with integrity, you may have to give up your family, you may have to give up your friendships, your career, your business partners, all of this stuff. I mean, it may reduce you extraordinarily in terms of income. It's certainly been my experience, having given up my career to do this full time. So the question is, if we say that philosophy leads to happiness and that's the purpose of it, then how do we explain that philosophy makes you very unhappy for quite some time before it makes you happier? And how do we make that case for people? Nobody.
How about how you just did? I mean, I don't think that was the best explanation, but he clearly thinks he got something across. How about... So saying happiness can't be the purpose of ethics because people won't go along with it because they have to go through unpleasant things before they get to happiness. That's just wrong. I mean, some people will, some people won't. It's just up to them. I mean, his view here, I mean, he was literally endorsing psychological egoism earlier. People pursue pleasure. That's what they do, right? According to his view, nobody ever breaks his diet unless that's what he preferred. Now, what does prefer even mean? We're talking objectively here. What's best for you? So is there no one on earth who has ever taken an action that has made him less happy than he otherwise would be? Obviously, there have been people. Most people are like that. Many people, just to take the most obvious example that I just did, they break their diet, and they know they would have been happier in the long run if they stayed on it, but they did it for the sake of the short-term pleasure, even though they would have been happier taking a different route. That is a totally possible and very common phenomenon. And so if your question is, well, I mean, we just have to find some way to trick people into it because we can't explain that to them. Why? You can totally explain that to them.
We can say you should do it objectively, right? So that's why my theory of ethics is very much removed from this, right? It's very much removed from this. I do believe that philosophy brings happiness, but my approach with the universally preferable behavior is quite separate. But I think this is a challenge, right? So Ayn Rand says, no, you do not have to live. It is your basic act of choice. But if you choose to live, you must live as a man by the work and judgment of your mind, right? So, but that's not true. I mean, you don't have to live as a man, as she says, by work and judgment. You can live very, very well as a dictator. Stalin and Mao wanted for nothing. And you could tell, well, they were secretly unhappy. Again, you have the problem that, right, of it being hedonism, right, pain-pleasure principle. Right? So either ethics are objective, in which case it doesn't matter whether people like it or not, or happy or not pursuing ethics, right? Any more than it matters whether or not somebody likes or dislikes the scientific method, right? It just, this is the route to truth or it's not. Logic is the route to truth or it's not, right? Language is objective use.
But what is the content of good, you cretin? Yes, logic is the way to get to truth. Okay, what is ethics? It's to get to good. Good is what? Good for man. And for you as an individual, for you. That is what pleasure, happiness is. But he's treating it like this mystical thing. Yes, you use logic to get to truth. You use ethics to get to happiness, but in Stefan's view, to get to the good is this rationalistic thing. God, he is dumb.
Use of language is the way to communicate, or you can make up your own language or speak in a clicking noise of your own, whatever, right? But it's not subjective. It doesn't matter whether you like the scientific method or whether the scientific method brings you happiness or unhappiness. But the scientific method has brought...
Yes, but ethics is objective in just the same way. It doesn't matter what you believe. Acting a certain way will bring you happiness, and acting other ways won't. Just as objective as science. It is a form of science. Happiness is just another kind of fact. It is just a fact that happiness is what it is and results from taking certain actions. It's just a branch of science, not in the sense that it's non-philosophical. I just mean in this broader sense of logical, rational.
A very large number of people who are mystics and so on, quite a lot of unhappiness, because they would prefer that there be psychic phenomena or whatever, right? So the pain and pleasure principle is not a basis for ethics, right? It makes them subjective. There's tons of evidence to disprove that that works in the world, and you have to then make up secret unhappiness for dictators and bad people and so on, and then explain if they're really unhappy why they don't change, right? That's the challenge that you have as an ethicist. Or you end up preaching to the choir and saying that you should want to do good because it's nice, in which case you are only talking to people who want to be good to begin with, right? So this is the challenge that you face, right? How do you reach these people? Which I think that I've taken a fairly good stab at, but again, you can let me know what you think. Right, so here's the key, right? But she says, no, you do not have to live. It is your basic act of choice. If you...
Well, I'll let you know what I think, just for the record. I have read some of his universally preferable behavior ideas. It's just, like so many other objectivism 2.0 ideas, it's just a straight rip-off of Rand, but contorted into total rationalism. It's completely idiotic.
Choose to live, then there are certain consequences. And of course there are certain consequences. Right? Yeah, absolutely. But that's conditional. If you want to live, then.
Yeah.
And that's why ethics don't exist in objective reality. She's trying to tie it into that which is required for life, and therefore you should be rational, you should not steal, you should not rape, and all this and that. But
yes, if you want to live, then. But you can't say, if you want to be happy, then. Yeah, I mean, there is an if you want to be happy. But that's not a choice. You are the kind of being who wants to be happy. Not in the sense that you've already made it a psychologically motivating desire, but want in the sense of, if you did it, it would be worth it. There's no if-then there. I mean, there is in the sense that if you were a different kind of organism, then you shouldn't. But you are that kind of organism if you are that kind of organism. And so you should do this. Should is just another kind of fact. It's just a way of saying, oh, I can be happy. That's a fact. The end.
If you choose to live, then you must live as a man by the work and judgment of your mind. Well, I guess that's true, but the work and judgment of your mind might be to dominate all those around you and steal their stuff, right? Which is what some people love to do. It makes them very happy, right? So how do you argue against that? Well, you can't, right, based on this argument. She says, no, you do not have to live as a man. It is an act of moral choice, but you cannot live as anything else. But that's not true even within her own writing, right? So the bad people get... they have...
This is a novel. David Friedman was bringing up all of these same points. Well, not all of them, but some other ones, but there's a lot of overlap here. He read a lot of these same points because they're the relevant ones. And it's just striking to me how these imbeciles, like, if this is how these people read literature, I mean, wow. And David Friedman is allegedly a novelist. I would never want to see what those novels are like, given how he and Stefan Molyneux treat this novel of Ayn Rand's. Treat Atlas Shrugged.
We have generations, she talks about generations of the moochers that lead to the catastrophes in the novel Atlas Shrugged, but they all did very well, thank you very much, right? It's like the Kantian principle, the categorical imperative, which says, act as if through your act, that every action of yours created a universal rule that everyone had to follow, right? It's like the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But somebody who's gained political power will say, well, let's let the military decide it, because I have the military and you don't. Somebody who is immensely strong will say, arm wrestling should decide where the goods go and who should have to marry me, because he's the strongest, right? The person who is the most verbally acute and the best debater will say, debating, and the appearance of, and the applause of the crowd or whatever should determine what is right and wrong. And I'm happy to make that a universal rule, because that's what I happen to be best in. Right, so none of these things work particularly well, which is why they've never gained any particular traction and have not replaced the great vacuum in ethics that the fall of religion has resulted in. So this sort of particular problem, I think, is something that Ayn Rand was not able to solve. Like this question of ethics. They don't exist objectively, they don't exist in the real world. They are not a natural byproduct of man's nature, any more than the scientific method is. Yes, it's efficacious. Yes, I do believe that it's true. Yes, I do believe that it's objective. But it is a choice whether or not you want to use the scientific method. Choosing the scientific method to determine truth from falsehood, say, or rationality, will benefit some people, and it will cost other people who would do better under an irrational system. Right? People who have a mystical bent, who are highly traumatized, they are going to flourish under a system. Right? Stalin, I mean, so let's look at Hitler, right? Hitler was an unemployed bum. Couldn't even get into an art academy and was living basically on the streets and in hostels, was skimping by on an ex-soldier's pension after World War I. And then he ends up in charge of the entire country, fabulously wealthy, able to do whatever he wants, invade, do this, which he all wanted to do, which all gave him pleasure, right? We can assume that genocide and war and murder gave him pleasure. Why? Because that's what he chose to do, right? So the challenge is, how do you say to people who take pleasure in evil that what they're doing is wrong? And again, I won't sort of go into my own theory, but I don't think Ayn Rand manages to pull it off. There is no way to solve the problem of ethics by saying either that you should pursue it based on pleasure, or that there's some sky god who will punish you, and so on. And the empirical evidence of those who flourish through acting irrationally, right? Just a biological mechanism, right? Those who flourish, who choose to do evil, and flourish in the world thereby, the entire political class. At the moment, soldiers flourish. I mean, we can assume that a soldier feels that he has more opportunities and better things to do in the army than he does, say, as a short order cook in Alabama or something. So he's choosing something which will help him flourish.
And he couldn't possibly be mistaken, right?
It's evil, of course, right? To be somebody who puts on a costume, takes orders to kill people, and goes and pulls triggers. That's a hit.
Oh wow, this is some vintage Molyneux. Anti-military Molyneux. Wow, I didn't realize he was. I don't know. Given his current appeasement of the alt-right, sometimes it's easy to forget how much of a traditional nihilistic libertarian he was. Maybe still is. I mean, he combines the worst of all worlds. That's really his real talent.
Right? So it's definitely wrong, but how is it that you're going to be able to say that? As soon as you say to this guy, well, God says it's wrong, he's going to say, no, God says I should defend onward Christian soldiers, kill the unbelievers, right? So you don't get any traction with that. If you say, well, you shouldn't be a soldier because it'll make you unhappy, the guy's going to be like, I think I'm the better judge of my happiness than you are, so I don't believe that either, right? So I don't think that you can make the case for rationality
Well, if it's not going to make him happy, you could give him a good argument as to why, and not just say it won't. People are open to evidence, often, not everybody, some people are. But also there's the maybe tiny possibility that being a soldier will make him happy because it's a good thing in many contexts to kill people in an organized way. It's called self-defense. Oh, but Stefan Molyneux is... and this is another reason you know he doesn't understand anything about objectivism, including its epistemology, because to him, this is... Libertarians are really, I think, D2, what Peikoff would call D2. Just active disintegrators. To them, any organization, any grouping of any kind, totally illegitimate. You're going to kill people in the name of a group. The state, the nation, that is total fairy tale. That's mysticism. No. Now, you can treat it as a supernatural entity, which it isn't, and you shouldn't treat it like that. That doesn't mean you also dissolve it and treat it as nothing. But of course, you'd have to actually understand Ayn Rand in order to have that perspective, which Stefan Molyneux does not.
Based on that which is good, right? That which serves life. Because that which serves life is to some degree subjective. Yes, we all need food and water, but that's not what Ayn Rand is talking about. She's talking about a deeper and wider and more substantial form of ethics. And I don't think that she made the case in a way that closes the problem, right? Closes the loop, deals with the problem of people who won't listen to ethics. You don't end up with the problem of saying to people, I know you better than you know yourself, and what you think of as happiness now will turn into unhappiness in 10 or 20 years, and therefore you should give up your career and go and be a short-order cook. People just won't listen to you in that situation, right? So the problem with ethics is that they are a human construct, like mathematics.
What is all of this? What is all of this about people listening to you? I thought he was concerned with truth over everything. It's true or it isn't, even if people don't listen to you. Now, if it is true, a lot of people will listen to you. But just a telling emphasis on his part. Other people won't listen. So does that make it not true? Is that part of your argument, Stefan Molyneux? Stefan, this is not an argument, Molyneux?
Scientific method, like logic itself, like language, doesn't mean that it's subjective, doesn't mean that it's whim-based. The scientific method is a human invention, but because it is identified with logic and reality and derived from the behavior of matter and energy, it's not subjective. Mathematics is a human invention, but it's not subjective. And we should not say, we can no more say to somebody that you should follow the scientific method to make you happy than we can say to somebody, you should apply good math because it'll make you happy. I do believe that the purpose of philosophy is happiness, but you can't base the argument for philosophy and ethics on happiness, because the pleasure and pain principle is widely distributed among the population. And if you've been raised in an abusive environment, you may be masochistic, in which case, or you may be sadistic, right? So that which gives you pleasure, that which makes you happy, is the suffering of somebody else, right? So I don't think that Ayn Rand solved the problem of ethics in any fundamental way. And again, the annoying thing is I agree with the epistemology, I agree with the metaphysics, and I agree with a lot of the ethics. But this gap, what I talked about, the Pick-me hijack in the podcast that's on the premium section of the Free Domain Radio website, that this leap is not solved, right? And you could see the effects of this in the objectivist community, right, which was throughout the 1960s, because there was this fundamental problem in the core of ethics, right, that ethics had not been proven. Ethics had merely been asserted. And when ethics are asserted rather than proven, you end up with highly emphatic and denunciatory attacks on people who question it, because there is this doubt at the center of ethics in just about every moral system, right? This is why the doubt that's at the center of ethics in religion result in violence, right? Heaven and hell, attacks on unbelievers, death for apostasy, and all this kind of stuff, right? Or a sort of freaky withdrawal from the conversation, which centers around these sorts of things, right? So the unproven nature of communism results in gulags, right? Wherever there's doubt that is bypassed, you end up with a very strong and aggressive overreaction to those who question it. And this is why objectivism, in my view, turned kind of culty, where you ended up with these terrifying and horrible and ridiculous mock trials of people who questioned Rand and their expulsion, and oh man, just a complete mess from that standpoint. And that's because there's this doubt, there's this instability at the core of ethics. that ethics do not exist independently of human consciousness. The challenge is to make them objective without relying on mysticism or the pleasure of pain principle, and I don't think that Ayn Rand dealt with that, and I think that she knew deep down that she didn't deal with it, which is why she became sort of hysterical and aggressive when questioned on this sort of, when you have doubt and you...
Or maybe it was because she had to deal with a lot of people like you, who are just incredibly stupid and dishonest. You know, if somebody gets angry when you question them, it could be because they've asserted something without really knowing why it's true, and your question is a challenge to what they assert because they know they can't justify it, or it could be because you are being a dishonest idiot. Well, I know which one of those was true in the case of Ayn Rand.
You've overreached in terms of your reasoning, particularly in the realm of ethics, which is the most important branch of philosophy. Everything else kind of leads up to that, right? Like, we have the scientific method not to diddle around with test tubes, but to be able to prove things about reality, right? To put the principles into practice. And everything in ethics, everything in philosophy builds up to how do I make decisions in the real world to be good and to be right. And so that's the core. That's the most important part of philosophy. People who make that leap from metaphysics to epistemology to moral philosophy end up having to attack those who question it because there's an instability at the core. That instability in the core had, I think, two significant results which destroyed objectivism in any real way. The first was that it became pretty culty. There was a wife swapping and mock trials, and it got pretty unpleasant at its core, and I was pretty horrified. If you want to read more about this, it's Judgment Day by Nathaniel Branden, or there's Barbara Branden had a book about it, right? As well,
Two
right, which
reputable
talks about the
sources.
inner workings of this pretty horrifying thing, and right, that's because...
Hey, I was interrupted, and now I'm back. I went back a little bit in the video, so there's only a few minutes left, but I didn't want to just cut this short abruptly.
Its core, and I was pretty horrified. If you want to read more about this, it's Judgment Day by Nathaniel Branden, or there's Barbara Branden had a book about it, right? As well, right, which talks about the inner workings of this pretty horrifying thing, and right, that's because there's this instability at the core of ethics, which means anybody who questions stuff has to be attacked, because you've got to sort of stay away from this wound, this painful spot of doubt, right? And the second thing, of course, that occurred because of this was that it had no consistency through to politics, right? Because there was this doubt in the realm of ethics. Whenever there's doubt in the realm of a particular ethical philosophy, you end up gravitating towards an authority figure, right? So where there's doubt in the realm of religious ethics, you end up with God and the Pope, and so because someone's got to resolve these disputes, and there's an irrational core that's a problem in the realm of ethics, so you have to appeal to an authority. Right, so with Ayn Rand, there were two, right? One was Ayn Rand, right? So she had this syllogism, this narcissistic syllogism that we must love the most rational. Ayn Rand is the most rational, therefore everybody must love Ayn Rand the most. Therefore anyone who questions that Ayn Rand is acting on immoral principles and must be attacked as evil and all this kind of stuff. I mean, this is really, really not healthy stuff, in my view. And the second, of course, is this led through to the political sphere, where, again, spoiler alert, stop if you haven't read the book, the solution in Atlas Shrugged is the reinstitution of a government, right? It's like, well, if you just correct the Constitution, then everything's going to be fine, right? So it takes a lot of certainty to be, I think, an ethical anarchist, right? I mean, and it takes, because once you have no doubt, right, and I think that, at least I don't, and I'm certainly looking, I've had 2 years of people kicking at my ethical theory and some very bright people, it still stands, so it doesn't mean, right, anyone can find a contradiction, but when you have certainty, then you don't need a central authority. Right? In the same way that when everybody believes in the scientific method, you don't need a dictator of science, right? You only need those things, you only need personal authority, you only need hierarchical or hegemonic systems usually founded on emotional or physical abuse, as in objectivism and as in a lot of other belief systems in the world. You only need those when you have doubt, when you have an enemy called doubt that you have to overcome, and it's an endless fight because it's really internal, but you projected it into the external world and so on. Wow. So the result, of course, of all of this inability to deal with this core problem of ethics is that you end up with a pretty hierarchical, pretty aggressive structure that is mirrored in the sort of mild interpersonal totalitarianism of the Ayn Rand cult, and then shows up again in her hostility towards anarchy and her belief that, well, if we just get the right people in charge and we recreate the government with better rules, that it's going to work out, right? Because if she'd really gotten the principle of ethics, then she would no more advocate the government as a solution for the problem of morality and social organization, then she would say that the government should run science and there should be a ministry of determining truth from falsehood. Right? She specifically attacks that in the Dr. Sadler character, but then because there's this core problem around ethics, she ends up having to go back to a government. And that's why the movement's self-destructed, right? I mean, it's that, what, so after all of this...
Oh, it's because ideas are not the same thing as force. You don't have the government deciding science because science is just ideas. There's no compulsion. You do have the government determining ethics in a sense, not really in the sense of telling you what's right and wrong, but stopping you from forcing other people, from aggressing against other people, to use terms I'm sure Molyneux would prefer. Because that's force. God, what an idiot. I'm embarrassed stopping on every one of these because they're just so stupid and obvious. This is beneath me.
We just end up with another government. So it's not government as a principle, the initiation of the use of force, that's wrong. It's just this government that's bad. And so people, if you're just going to go in a big circle, what's the point, right? So I think this is where people had a certain problem with Ayn Rand and why the movement failed. And I've tried as best as I can to try and learn the lessons of the past. And she was a magnificent thinker in so many ways. And frankly,
he has no right to give that praise, and she would be disgusted with him. But also this idea of government as necessarily an initiator of force, that is just a total libertarian canard. And I'll address that at some point. I'm sure it'll come out in some written form, but somebody will probably bring that up in a video at some point, and I'll explain it more there. But for now, I am tired of this creature.
The problem of ethics is a real bitch. So I hope that I've taken some steps forward in that direction. And, it's the old, if I happen to have seen a little further, again, as Newton said, it's only because I have stood on the shoulders of chain-smoking Russian giants. Thank you so much for listening. I will continue this analysis, and please let me know what you think.
And what if you didn't see farther? What if you are instead looking backwards, which you are? Anyway, I'm worn out from that. So, there's another video of his about Ayn Rand or debunking Ayn Rand's criticisms of anarchism. So I have that planned. I'll do that the same way I did this one in a while. But anyway, that's it for today. New episodes of the podcast will go up on Mondays, and they will be like they used to be, unless my computer blows up or something. But given everything I know, I expect new episodes to come out. So I'll continue answering your questions on Monday. Bye.